Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents On the Warpath by Michael Chatfield and Dawn Chapman, narrated by James Anderson Foster. Chapter 1. The Yard, Arc Orbit, Immoral System, 10/3559. It had been over 2 years since the Leuton fleet had attacked the Immoral System. Their actions had brought the system and its people together. The yard was heavily damaged and unable to come out of its defensive mode. With the mergers and the crews of the yard working together, they had been able to repair the yard and once again get it functional. As this was going on, a second yard was created. This was the Navy Yard with the express purpose of making military vessels. With their newly trained staff and the merger's abilities, building had progressed smoothly. Trade had been established with the Union planets, many freighters coming from all over to try to buy the highly advanced technology. The Immoral System was the pearl of humanity, where miracles were made. The Victor Corporation fleet was operating throughout the colonies. The corporations were powerless to stop them. Sol had turned into a system filled with civil war, with the Union watching to make sure that none of the war spilled over and affected the rest of the Union. Maraukian barges were appearing across humanity's controlled systems. With them, more people were gaining weapons and overthrowing the corporations. Jerome knew that Moretti's hand was in most of those dealings. VCF Reclaimer coming in from the Leuton system, SMI said as Jerome looked over from his station to the main star map that showed the dozens of ships moving through the system. I don't think the Leuton conglomerate was so happy with what we returned to them, Jerome said dryly. They'd repatriated the Leuton conglomerate forces that had attacked Immoral. These were the soldiers who had been ejected by their own captains into space. Returning to Immoral, they were the only military force in system. With their gliders and strength, they were able to erase the Leuton conglomerate and created an AI progressive system. Again, Moretti's work in convincing them and getting the people to stand up and fight for their freedom. Earth and her colonies only existed in name now. When returning to Immoral from 3 systems, many of the mega freighters would have thousands of people looking to gain Immoral citizenship or attend the Immoral skill schools, which were now renowned through human-controlled space. Jerome sat back in his chair a bit. We've created the fastest merchant fleet in the entire Union and the fastest warships. I never thought we would have an entire system to call home. Jerome's eyes moved to Tyler, who was waddling around with something in his mouth. Still, Jerome's smile was only faint. SMI moved from her desk to his, hugging him from behind, even with her large belly. It's fine to be upset, SMI said, reading his mind. Jerome rubbed her arm, but he knew that although she tried her best and sympathized, she didn't know what it meant to be on that front line, to be aboard a ship going to war. That tension filled the air and was a running undercurrent to everyone's day-to-day activities. He knew these things all too well. His guts turned over in guilt. They'll arrive in the talk system in just a few weeks, Jerome said. SMI didn't say anything, just hugged him a bit tighter. Jerome patted her arm and let out a deep breath. He turned around and pulled her into his lap. I'll break the chair, she complained. Don't worry, Mark's heavy ass reinforced it, Jerome smiled. SMI pouted and pinched him as Jerome showed a sliver of a smile. All right, Mrs. SMI Victor, what do you need me to do? Production is up across the board. The yard is back in operation, and Charles's Mega Stage 4 forge is working overtime to create parts for the freighters. I've heard from the Navy Yard they've got 4 more warships which will be ready for testing over the next 3 months. Once completed, they'll be working on retail Praetor cannons and defensive missile systems. Everyone and their cousin is looking for more defensive weapon systems after the last 4 attacks by the Maraukians. SMI's expression soured. Jerome couldn't blame her. Sacramon had been turned into an uninhabited system, with the Maraukians clearing out the population and then burrowing into the planet. If anyone stepped onto that planet, they would need to deal with the Maraukians surging out and killing them. The Maraukians went into a kind of hibernation, but not before they replenished their numbers. Once the Maraukians took a planet, then it was nearly impossible to get rid of them. Mintron of the old EHC was attacked as well, but with the Union's support and weapons, they were able to save about 20% of their population and regain control over their main planet. They had applied to be a member of the Union afterward and were going through a rapid period of growth as their population moved out to learn more and return home with their skills. Some people from the Amaral system had even settled down there. The systems Yui and Preiki had fallen under attack, but since Cassius returned to power, the entire Union had been overhauled, including the Senate and all of the legions. There was no place for politics within the military ranks anymore. They, too, had Sam, who elected people of the Union to take command over different areas. At least humanity is working together, and we have more safeguards left in place, Jerome said. You mean the Shadow Legion turning into mergers and supporting Sam? Essamai said. It was a natural choice. This way they get to actually live, and they can cut out corruption before it's fully formed. With Sam, their actions are limited, and with the others knowing what they are doing, it's a self-regulating group. To safeguard humanity sounds like one hell of a complicated job. Thankfully, we just have to deal with building ships. Essamai moved, getting more comfortable in Jerome's lap. How are the factories coming along? I haven't looked at them in a while. Good. Much faster than I expected, Jerome admitted. The holographic projector in the room dimmed the lights as the system appeared. The original station now had 3 rings around it. The Aegean Gardens orbited the planet, and there were signs of another station being built around Tricticus's orbit. Out from Tricticus there were 4 stations being built. These were the factories that took in materials from the refineries, turned them into useful items, and sent them across the system or out to other human planets. With the factories, we were able to reclaim a lot of the yard's real estate back for building ships. They're also building subsystems, which, even though we could build them here, it takes them less time to make them. The new forges that the engineering group from the Crucible were able to think up are really showing their abilities. The stations aren't even fully built, but they're already exporting forges to other ships and groups who need them. Seems we've got some good competitors, Essamai smiled. Only one of the factories was owned by the Victor Corporation. The others were backed by different groups in the Amaral system, or had loans with the Victor Corporation or other financiers in the Union. From the beginning, they never wanted the Victor Corporation to control everything in the system. Finally, things were starting to grow organically as new businesses started to appear, and the whole system was undergoing a massive, accelerated rate of improvement. The problem we're having, even with the mining efforts going on within the Ark and the asteroid belt, is the refineries are currently our choke point. With the loss of Refinery 3, we've been down in production a lot. With new refining processes and 2 grinders working full-time, we should be reaching a state where our resources are meeting our needs, at least for a few weeks. Jerome sighed. It's a sign of progress. Essamai tousled his hair. Jerome grunted. The grinders were basically massive vats of nanites. Asteroids were slowly placed in them, and they seemed to dissolve, being broken apart by nanites and sorted. It was a slow process, but if the asteroid had a high purity of metals, it was faster than having to separate the metals out again and again through chemical processes. Johnny tells me everything is going well and that Refinery 3 will be rebuilt and ready to start working, Essamai said. That's good. Felicia has been complaining about the number of raw materials she has and needs to get refined, Jerome laughed. Those 2 are certainly personalities. Essamai shook her head as Jerome grinned. Tyler came around the corner of Jerome's desk and looked at Essamai and Jerome with confused eyes. Well, I think it's about time for lunch. Come on, boys, Essamai said. Jerome helped her to get upright. He looked to the hologram in the middle of the room again. It couldn't be compared to the Amaral system just 3 years ago, as ships moved constantly from all corners of humanity's systems. Still, he frowned as he thought of his friends who were hurtling toward the unknown, chasing down wherever that signal that controlled the Maraukians was coming from. Chapter 2. The Core. Prina, Sharventi Home System, 10-3559. Sharventi sat around a table, 13 of them in total. All of them had bland looks on their faces as they sat. Identical to one another, their uniforms were all the same except for the marker on their shoulders. One stood up from the masses. On his shoulder a human male and female patch showed. Race 4, named Humans, has shown mass improvement over the past 2 years. It seems that a group within the human race was able to find our signal and are moving to an offensive position. It is the expectation of my department, based on human behavior, that the human fleet will attack and move forward to the 4th stage of the plan, advancing on the Sharventi communication centers that relay the signal to the Maraukian systems and fighters. Once they advance through these relay stations, they will reach the Sharventi home system, and we can start with Part 5 of the plan, Calling of the Black Guard. The Sharventi's eyes were dim. None of them showed any excitement, fear, or anxiousness as they took in the information. Time till completion? Operator 7, overlooking the Talax race, asked. 1 to 2 years, Operator 4 said. Previous prediction models set a time window of 80 more years, Operator 11 said. Yes, the predictive model has been updated, but even with its information it seems unable to fully understand the path of the races with 20% margin for error. The group called Mergers, a subspecies of the humans and an advancement in their biological and mechanical machines, show an error rate of 40 to 45% when analyzing them with the predictive models. The degree of error is high. We will continue with focusing on completing the stages, Operator 7 said. There was nothing more that needed to be said. They all knew the same information and had been groomed into these positions from birth. Seeing there was no one else who needed to talk, they stood and departed. Chapter 3. Refinery 3, Oort Cloud, Immoral System, 10-3559. Johnny watched as the rebuilt and much better Refinery 3 was almost ready to be brought back online. Leon and Misha waited at their consoles, ready to relay any and all information he wanted. The truth was, Johnny just liked to feel like a starship captain, and up here, with them, it felt as if he were. All systems are in the green, Misha reported in as Johnny watched to see gaseous puffs shoot out from the station's 4 main funnels. One more than they were used to, but the upgrades had condensed their whole process, leaving them with lots of space to fill. Might as well push in another unit. It had been tight, but this would now be the largest out of all the refineries that he owned, and he knew the extra output would make Felicia happy, as well as all the new crews he could hire in. Nothing made him happier as a business owner than being able to provide for everyone. Of course, for him, it hadn't always been this way. Building what he had taken many years and a lot of balls to do so. Felicia's voice came across to him. "Everything all right down there?" "Yes. Looks like we'll be able to take your loads as soon as the system's been fully checked over." "Good. Getting tired of having to shift this stuff farther than I need to for a pay packet." Johnny laughed, and he noticed a slight shift in one of Misha's readings. He stepped closer toward her just as several lights started turning from green to red. "Section 2 is misfiring across the board." Johnny waited as Leon started to act, giving out orders to those inside the unit. He watched on as unit leaders relayed them and his personnel's reactions kicked in. Misha matched Leon's instructions, making sure all the other team leaders were aware of the situation and they were ready to act if the reactions going on inside couldn't be stopped. In all the years he'd been doing this, Johnny had only ever seen one refinery have problems. only ever seen the damage one could do planet-side when they went up. Out here, everything was different. We've lost it once, have faith. Johnny pulled every bit of faith he thought he had and tried to push against it. Their luck was changing, he knew it. It had to be. Give me the team leader's view up if you can. Johnny was soon watching the live feed from the man's NIAI and hearing his orders as he gave them out. Misha looked confused, but looking up at him, Johnny mouthed for her, "He's got this under control, don't worry." And Johnny wasn't worried. He could see that he was doing his job, and perfectly well. Around him, people moved and whirled, a perfect vision of perfective management. "How are the stats?" Johnny asked. "Decreasing back down. We'll be back in the green in no time." Johnny smiled. This was a good thing to happen now. Better for the system to have a couple of glitches now than when there were real goods going through. If it had been running and not testing, it could have been a huge payload wasted, one that he would still have to pay for without being able to deliver the refined product to someone else. "Unit 2 will have to stay offline for a while, till we've completed some more checks," Leon said. Johnny understood. Lives and money was at stake. There were no higher bets in this world. Pela hadn't just watched the new refinery go up in smoke, but nearly. After their last escape from the Leuchten fleet blasting it and her asteroid into pieces, Pela had really had enough of things going wrong. From that day she'd vowed to continue to strive for the community around her, and she'd worked damned hard to get where she was. Today, however, was her birthday, and despite wanting to get in and get the loads on their way to the new refinery, she wanted to spend time with her boyfriend. It had taken a while longer for Lucas to ask her out properly. Ashaid really had been jealous, but he was 2 years younger than her. Lucas was 2 years older, and no matter how much she thought of Ashaid, she didn't quite see him the way he wanted her to. "What's it like to be 21? Lucas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Pela didn't answer right away because it felt weird. She'd known it was coming, and it should have been a big day for her, but this felt so very wrong with everything going on about them as it had and was doing. "It feels good," she said. "Besides, you promised me some Vermont chocolate cake from the main station. I do hope you managed to keep that promise." Lucas chuckled and nibbled her ear. "I have another surprise for you," he whispered. Pela squirmed around in his grip. "What?" He smiled, but just winked at her instead. Then he held out a key card. "What is this?" She took it from him and looked it over. There was a small number on the bottom left. Apartment 206. "I thought it was about time we did something for us, that was right for us." Pela swallowed. "You're asking me to move out of the dorms, right?" Lucas nodded. "Yes. With this promotion for me, for us, I think it's about time we stepped away from the others a little. Give us more time to be together." Pela leaned in and kissed him. "I know how much you like being a part of the crew, but I want more time with you." Pela watched as fire rose up the side of his neck. "Ah, you mean you want sex every night, and not every once in a blue moon. You know I'm not like that, Pela continued to laugh and pulled him in closer. "Of course I'll move in with you. Sounds wonderful. But," she said, "I still want that chocolate cake." Lucas eased off her and took her hand in his. "Let's go check it out. A full-sized chocolate cake is in the fridge just for you." "Gandhi?" Pela asked. "Weight check?" "Weight has declined in the last couple of weeks, but is still within parameters." Pela frowned to herself. No matter how much she seemed to eat, sometimes it was a constant battle. When Lucas realized she'd stopped walking, he turned to her. "What's wrong?" "You think I'm ill, don't you? Just like Dr. McKay did a few years ago." A slight frown crossed his face. "I don't think today's the right day for this conversation." Pela's anger rose. "There's never going to be a right time for it." Pela could see him squirm almost as her anger rose all the more. "I eat everything I'm given. I eat everything you all ask me to." Tears started to fall then, and Lucas pulled her to him, wrapping her up once more. Hey, this is supposed to be a happy day. I can't eat any more than you're giving me. I'm not throwing it away. I'm not hiding it, I swear. Gandhi looks after you, and so do we, but something isn't right. I don't know why, but your metabolism switches so much no one can predict what you're burning. Even the NIAIs are having trouble. Pela looked up into his eyes. So, I'm sick? All vitals and checks are normal. Gandhi replied to this in her ear. We've booked you back in with Dr. McKay in a few days. She will get to the bottom of it. Pela looked away and out into the vastness of nothing. She didn't want to go back. If she had to, she'd eat the whole darn chocolate cake today. Chapter 4. SLS Steady. Talk System. 11/3559. Captain Lucy Kwan moved with her patrol group around the talk system. It was one of the systems farthest from the center of humanity. Though in the last year it had seen a massive growth as ships and personnel were shifted to the system. Once it was revealed there was a signal controlling the Maraukians, Cassius moved into talks with the mergers to coordinate an offensive to find out where this signal was coming from and destroy it. If they could stop the Maraukians getting orders and being told how to build ships, then it was possible they could enter a time of peace, clearing out the remaining planets which held human populations on them and then dealing with the planet-bound Maraukians. With the Emperor back in command, the Union had been quickly reorganized, with the new systems put in place to assure that the system wouldn't fall into depravity again. Business had exploded as defensive structures, stations, ships, and weapons were supplied to systems across the Union. Lucy Kwan had been promoted 3 times since the purge of the Union, leading to her position as a small patrol commander. Transit signal found, Riol, her sensors officer, said. On screen. Joas, inform Admiral Nessa. Kwan snapped off as she looked at the information coming in through her NIAI. A moment later, a ship appeared. Then another, and another. Dozens started to transit into real space and store their Alcubierre drives away. Identification codes have been confirmed. It's the Amaral fleet, Riol said. Kwan looked to Joas. Relaying to higher, Captain, Joas said. Kwan smiled and relaxed. Continue on patrol route. Kwan snuck a glance at the Amaral Navy. At the center there were 10 troop transports and 15 supply ships. They were joined by 20 carriers and battleships, with the Moby riding among them all. She looked over the Moby. It wasn't the first time she'd looked at the mysterious ship. It had grown again. The old-style carrier had been heavily upgraded, and not even the Space Legion knew what the full capabilities of the ship were. The mergers had proved one thing. They weren't to be underestimated, and they were not an opponent one wanted to fight. The crew of the Moby was made up of mergers only. There were mergers serving on other ships, but the fact was the Moby's abilities, although they were survivable for the mergers, if someone was a human, there was a high risk of being severely or critically injured. The Moby was meant to lead the way, with the Vanguard, RSDs, tanks, and artillery coming in support to clear an area for the remaining troopers to land and assist the merger ground forces. There was something powerful that gripped Kwan as she saw those 66 ships moving in formation for the interior of the talk system. This would be their platform to launch their offensive. Kwan felt a sour taste in her mouth. While they were heading out toward war, the Legion was still in a defensive posture, holding what they had. Still, it felt good they were moving in the right direction finally. Things were actually happening instead of it all becoming stagnant. Chapter 5. ENS Homeland. Talk System. 11/3559. The fleet made an impressive sight as it moved toward the deployment station near the Oort cloud of the system. Looks like they've been following your exploits, Admiral, Rasilov said as information appeared on the main screen. Now, Rasilov, play nice, Admiral Hall smiled. Got flight details for the fleet, sending them out, Yeltsin said. The others in the command center were used to Admiral Hall and his command staff's ways. Their history was long, and they'd been with one another longer than they'd been with some of their significant others. "We're all clear within a few light minutes," Rasilov updated. "Good. Now, Guy, you look like you want to ask me something by the way your board is lighting up." "The supply ships want to go and scavenge some asteroids," Guy sighed. "Let them." Hall sighed, feeling as if he was letting puppies off their leashes. The supply ships were always focused on having the most amount of materials on board so they could resupply the fleet as needed. "I wonder if they know there's going to be asteroids in other systems?" Rasilov asked. Selleck shrugged from his place at weapons. "We've been okayed for sensor buoy uplink. Connecting you now, Rasilov." "Nice." Rasilov turned his attention to his station and forwarded all of the sensor information to Admiral Hall. He looked out over the system. There hadn't been much here just a few years ago. The system was inhabited and had a fighting force, as well as a supply station for the Space Legion. Upon learning about the signal and how it was close to the talk system, Cassius had ordered the Legion to set up a position there. They were seeding the area around the system and beyond with sensor buoys to try to understand what was going on. The other system close to the system the signal was coming from was Sacramon. There was a sensor network there, but the system had been lost already, so infrastructure had been placed in the systems nearest to it. They'd also sent out scout ships, not like the Phoenix that Captain Chen used to command, to search the system HIP 103039, where the signal was coming from. It was heavily inhabited by Maraukians, but the signal looked to originate from an asteroid belt. For now, Hall pushed that to the side as he looked at the roving patrols and the different bases in the system, as well as the defensive cannons and launchers which orbited the habitable moon of the system. When he was listening to the hum of chatter and looking out over the star system, he was struck by the beauty of the system, the tranquility of those moving planets. Even as he had fought his entire life, these planets had continued to spin around this blazing star, and they would continue to do so well after he had passed away. They were fighting to survive, to try to reach further into that distance called time. He didn't know who he was fighting or why they were fighting humanity. All he knew was where he needed to go. Chapter 6. Emperor's Residence, Roma, Hellenic System, 11/3559. Cassius had gotten used to reports being on the slower side of things, and it made him kick back today and relax. The sun shone in through the open windows, and the breeze drifted in. Moving over to look out at the building around him, he'd finally decided that maybe it was time for him to step down, to let someone new take over. The thoughts whirled around in his head, but he'd still not gotten the courage to do so. After the initial cleansing 2 years ago, it had taken some strength in voice and determination in the heart to start to bring things back to some semblance of order, even backing in full the Shadow Legion's choices, the decision on whose lives to end, thankfully not his. However, now, the more he thought about it, the better he felt. Roma had once again begun to thrive. Most of the Shadow Legion members had moved on. They'd trained with Moretti and become mergers to go mount the offensive in the talk system. Some had made the pact once more to defend Roma in her darkest days and had gone back into cryo. They would be there if ever needed in the future. That was their right to make that decision. What had surprised him was that Zedra wanted to stay awake. She was more than thorough with her work here, and he'd expected her to want to go back below. The day she appointed her next-in-command to take her place, he'd found it strange. He'd asked her why, but he knew. The fire burning inside her to destroy the Maraukians. And he'd remembered reading about what happened to her family those many years ago. Besides, she'd also smiled at him, I might well live to see the Shadow Legion rise once again. Those who hadn't gone below then trained with her and Moretti. Cassius was interested in the process, and he visited their training grounds quite extensively at first, just so he could get to know the ins and outs of the selection. Today he wanted to see the sun, walk in the gardens. Roma had been mostly rebuilt, not only in its leadership personnel, but in its surrounding...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?